Over the years, there have been some fantastic gaming magazines, many of which didn't last very long. Some lasted for a very long time, including Electronic Gaming Monthly, which just finally ended after over 20 years. So let's take a look back at some of the greatest gaming magazines of all time, including some that are still around today. Take a look. So, June of last year, I received a phone call. While in New Hampshire shooting some footage at Fun Spot for a new review, I received the news that I feared I would hear one day. My basement had flooded. Water was everywhere. As a good friend, Lance ran over to my house to start moving some stuff out. I was over 4 hours away and there was nothing I could do. Lance knew what was important now. Of course, I needed to know some information about the damage for the insurance company, but I also needed to know what was safe. With all that was lost, did my childhood float away as well? Of course, there was structural damage and potential harm to my washer and dryer, but what happened to my heirlooms, the tangible objects that carried my memories? Like many of you, my basement was also my man cave, my game room. I frantically searched my mind. What was on the ground? What was on the bookshelves? What might have fallen? My mental checklist went wild. Games, systems, comic books, record collection, furniture, rugs, clothing. But with Lance on the phone, the first thing I wanted to know about, the most important thing that came to my head at that very moment, were my Nintendo powers safe? Why did this come first above everything else? Why did I want to know about Nintendo powers before the games? I had to figure that out. During the 80s and 90s, many different activities defined my childhood. Building forts, playing in the woods with friends, football games and baseball games played in backyards, time with family, and of course, video games. As with all these memories and all childhood moments, they all intertwine and build each other up. Before the internet, gaming culture existed in two arenas, either talking with friends about games and gaming magazines. Before there could ever be websites like Retroware TV, there were magazines like Sega Visions, Turbo Play, EGM, Gamepro, and many more. Reading about games coming out soon and new systems was one of my favorite pastimes. The magazines not only supported my hobby, but they also validated my interests. The images within those magazines strike the same emotional chord that resonates as deeply as a scene or a moment in some of my favorite games. I can still remember back in 1987 becoming an official card-carrying member of the Nintendo Fun Club and receiving the first newsletter in the mail. That same feeling of excitement permeates my mind when I see those old back-page Nintendo ads, all those pristine boxes lined up next to the full system. Maybe one day I'd have them all. I was always a fan of what was on the cutting edge. This often correlated directly to Japan and Japanese gaming culture. Other magazines such as EGM and later Diehard Game Fan really focused on that aspect of gaming. I can still recall the excitement of seeing the first shots of the Super Famicom in 1990 in the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly. Or that time when the Nintendo Fun Club ended its run and I received the first issue of Nintendo Power in the mail for free. With that first issue, Super Mario Bros. 2 became my third-grade Christmas obsession. With all the nostalgia that manifests itself in playing a game I once played when I was 9 years old, the time machine in my mind is always activated even more wildly when I recall the excitement of a video game magazine. The game itself is an experience that accelerates the recollection of a time period when the memory was not of the game itself, but the excited anticipation of what was to come. Video game magazines are more adept at bringing me back to that time when childhood excitement was so real you could almost touch it. So as I look down in front of me at these waterlogged portals into my past, I will say goodbye by taking a look at some of my favorites. The Nintendo Fun Club began in the spring of 1987 and was a free publication sent to anyone who sent in the pack-in card that came with NES games or from other promotional sources. You would receive a small cardboard membership card and monthly issues of the Fun Club newsletter that outlined the top 5, what's coming soon, as well as some tips and tricks among other smaller features and articles about Nintendo's entertainment system. The magazine was relatively thin and only had a few issues, but along with being a walk down memory lane, it is also a nice collectible to find. The newsletter originally began as basically that, a newsletter, before becoming a more magazine-looking thing with full color. Its run ended as Nintendo was launching their Nintendo Power magazine, a magazine that, unlike the Fun Club newsletter, would also focus on third-party created games. If you were a member of the Fun Club, you received that first issue of Nintendo Power for free as a courtesy, but a paid subscription was required to get anything past that first issue. This free issue was a great success as many Fun Club members quickly subscribed. Nintendo Power started in July 1988, and it ran bi-monthly for about 2 years. The first 6 issues had a bound spine, and are still some of the most prized gaming collectibles. Luckily, the first 50 or so issues of Nintendo Power were not harmed in my flood. For years, advertisements were not allowed in the magazine, and some of the features that existed in the Fun Club newsletter were expanded and carried over into the Nintendo Power magazine. Nintendo Power exemplified gaming in the late 1980s, and it introduced gamers to Howard and Nestor and began to revolutionize the strategy guide. A lot has been said about Nintendo Power over the years, from its obvious existence as Nintendo propaganda to its horrible run with stapled bindings. The magazine is a veritable walk through the history of Nintendo in America. As of issue number 222 in 2007, Nintendo Power was no longer published directly by Nintendo, but while maintaining its official ties to the Nintendo brand, the magazine still exists and continues on in its 21st year. Electronic Gaming Monthly, or EGM, was released shortly after the Nintendo Power, as video games, thanks to the NES, continued to regain popularity as the toy choice of all kids in America during the 1980s. The magazine covered all video game systems, for the most part excluding computer games released, a topic more covered by the magazine Video Games and Computer Entertainment, or VGCE for short. When I was a subscriber in the mid-90s, EGM always boasted about having the largest issues. Even if they were more than 300 pages, every other page was an advertisement like I was reading Vogue or some other women's fashion magazine. Of course, pre-internet, I did often import older games from the mail-order ads that were at the back of the magazine. It was much harder ordering that rare PC Engine game before the turn of the century with the internet. My favorite part about EGM was that it looked at Japanese gaming, one of the first magazines to do so. It was my first chance to see what gaming was like in the place where the games originated. It made EGM must-reading in the early 90s. Like all gaming mags that lasted a long time, the magazine matured with its readers. What was once a writing style more geared toward children and young teens seemed to grow older as I did, providing a slightly more irreverent and adult level of content. EGM only just ended in January of this year, a little bit shy of its 20th anniversary. A sad end to a great publication and one of the true signs of a changing time. Gamepro also began around the same time in 1989. Along with EGM, Gamepro was able to jump into the magazine arena just as the 16-bit era was beginning. Gamepro was one of my least favorite gaming magazines. If for any reason it was because of its damned stapled pages, I can't tell you how many coverless Gamepros I have stacked up from the early 90s. But Gamepro too has grown over the years, and it is still a mainstay in popular gaming publications. As time went on, more magazines were released. Specialty mags like Turbo Play and later Turbo Force had short lives. EGM even had EGM2 for a short period of time. Nintendo had Nintendo Power as Sega had its Visions magazine. But with the mid-90s and the explosion of 16-bit and beyond, more interesting and different magazines began to appear. Two of my favorites that are no longer with us are Diehard Game Fan and Next Generation. In 1992, Diehard Game Fan magazine was released, and was unlike any other gaming magazine available at the time. Unlike EGM or Nintendo Power or GamePro, Diehard Game Fan magazine actually portrayed Japanese gaming culture and RPGs in a much greater light than any of the other magazines had. They had full color spreads for their gaming reviews, and they also discussed anime in a time period that was far earlier than when anime started to make it big in the United States. This was really a gaming magazine for some of that small niche of gamers that were really into only the Japanese culture aspects of video games, along with really high quality reviews. Next Generation magazine, or Next Gen, was released in 1995. Unlike other gaming magazines, Next Gen focused most of their attention on more of the industry aspects of video gaming. There were interviews with creators on a more general look. It wasn't so much on the games that were coming out or the individual titles that had been released. It was more of a look at the industry as a whole. And this was very odd for a gaming magazine, and it still is today. Most gaming magazines are very much centered on the individual gaming experience, while Next Gen was kind of a cross between a trade publication as well as an outlook of what's to come in the future. It was a much more adult magazine, and probably because it did follow such a small audience, or it was attracted to such a small audience, it really wasn't going to last too long. Along with the past, we can't forget some of the great magazines out today. For your retro gaming fix, there's Retro Gamer from the United Kingdom, a meticulously crafted magazine focusing exclusively on classic games and classic game creators, along with the history and collecting aspect to the hobby we all love. In the US, we have Videogame Collector, a great independent gaming magazine that has had some problems with releasing on time and with some of their subscribers. They release only a few a year at sporadic time periods. I've found a few issues at a few Blockbuster video stores, but I can't seem to locate them anywhere else. Play Magazine is a very stylish magazine that focuses on new releases as well as gaming culture as a whole. Extensive looks at anime and Japanese gaming, along with history elements, makes this magazine one of my favorites out today. Edge, out of the UK, is very similar to what Next Generation used to be, along with a little bit of play mixed in. The creators of Next Gen in the States were those who created Edge, so it makes sense that the similarities are there. If it weren't for the high cost of the import subscriptions, I'd definitely have more Retro Gamer and Edge magazines in my collection. One of my favorite gaming magazines today is actually a free fanzine you can download each month if you are a member of the Nintendo Age website. Nintendo Age focuses exclusively on the collecting and the history of the Nintendo NES. This monthly fanzine has exclusive content, interviews, and collecting minutiae that you can't find anywhere else. The PDF download each month is in full color and very nicely produced, and it also includes an updated NES game price guide to help you know the going rate of some of your favorites. I love this publication so much that I print them out each month and store them safely in a binder in my game room. I look forward to this magazine each month like I used to for Nintendo Power. There are many more gaming magazines, but being limited with the time and the geography, I'm only covering some of the titles from here in the States. Feel free to discuss this further in the forums over at RetrowareTV.com, as I know I can't be the only one out there who loves this topic. Since most people receive their up-to-date gaming news from the internet, the economic downturn may cause firms to reposition themselves in order to save costs, and thus, it's quite possible that many more companies may end the runs of some established brand names, like EGM. We're already starting to see this with the newspaper industry falling prey to the advance of mobile and internet technologies. Considering the gaming public is generally a more tech-savvy group who can easily find their gaming news from internet sources, gaming magazines may continue to be a less appealing asset for organizations to maintain. The economic recession could potentially accelerate the permanent changes in how we receive gaming information. We will always remember the time when getting that new game magazine showed the promise of what was to come. Reading those pages of old publications would make you feel part of a larger community, the community of gamers that we still are today. Nothing will stop that memory. Not new technology, not a failing economy, not even a flood in the basement.